Welcome, everybody. Thank you so much for being here for our amazing 15th anniversary of the 11 Days of Global Unity. I'm Karen Palmer. I'm known as Mindful Media Mom and Miss Kindness on all social media. I'm going to be one of your hosts, but just to let you know, this is going to be an incredible summit. So we would love for you to share this out, share it to all your timelines, share it to all your pages that you manage, and please share it to any groups that you might be a part of. We're going to be talking about some really powerful solutions for our world, and I get to co-host this incredible summit with my amazing and wonderful friend, Mr. Rick Alfeck. Do you know he is the founder of We the World, which is we.net? And he is also the co-creator of the 11 Days of Global Unity, 11 campaigns for change and transforming the world, a global platform to unite and amplify the efforts of people, organizations, and movements working for the common good. Participants have included Desmond Tutu, Jane Goodall, Deepak Chopra, Marianne Williamson, Bill McKibben, Jonathan Granoff, and many, many others. Rick, welcome.
Well, it's great to be on with you as always, Karen. And just so people know who our host, Karen Palmer, is, she is a mom who made a wish that sparked a kindness revolution. She is a global kindness leader and educator at globalkindnesstv.org and a live stream and social media expert, a best-selling author, and she co-produces several popular online talk shows, including We the World's monthly Welcome to We show. Thank you, Karen. And thank you all so much for joining us today. We encourage you to check out all the panels of this 11 Days of Global Unity telesummit on the 11 campaigns for change. Together, they form a blueprint for global transformation. Today, we will be talking about disarmament with a focus on nuclear weapons. To discuss this, we are excited to be joined by two global leaders in this area. Jonathan Granoff, president of the Global Security Institute, and Alan Ware of Parliamentarians for Nuclear Non-Proliferation and Disarmament. So before we get to Alan Ware on video, Jonathan would like to say a few words about Alan.
Oops, you're muted.
Thank you very much, Karen and Rick. It's an honor to talk about Alan Ware. He was a school teacher in New Zealand, and he understood that every one of his children that he was teaching lives under the threat of nuclear annihilation. The World Health Organization filed a petition to have the International Court of Justice address the legality of the threat or use of nuclear weapons. The World Health Organization argued that in the event of the use of nuclear weapons, they would be unable to provide adequate medical services for the billions of injured people. The nuclear weapon states argued effectively to the court that the World Health Organization was not competent to cause it to address this issue. And the court rejected the standing or the competency of the World Health Organization to do this. I think this is somewhat outrageous, and so did Alan and a handful of other people. And Alan was one of the leaders of what was called the World Court Project. And they organized and persuaded the General Assembly of the United Nations to cause the court to address the test. Is it legal to threaten or use nuclear weapons? We'll talk about that when I talk later. But Alan was instrumental in causing that landmark legal decision to be rendered. After that, Alan was instrumental in helping to create a model nuclear weapons convention. And since then, he has been singularly inspiring literally hundreds of parliamentarians the world over to join Parliamentarians for Nuclear Non-Proliferation and Disarmament. The current president of the General Assembly has been an active member. Senator Ed Markey in the United States from Massachusetts. is a co-president. Jeremy Corbyn is on the governing council, the leader of the Labour Party in England. It's multi-party, and it's all over the world. And I thank Alan for responding to this call for peace that came to his heart way down south in New Zealand and spreading it all over the world.
Well, that's great. So let's go to Alan Ware. I'm going to share the screen so we can see our video with him. Alan Ware is a New Zealand peace educator and campaigner in the areas of peace, nonviolence, nuclear abolition, international law, women's rights, children's rights, and the environment. A 2009 Right Livelihood Award laureate, Alan is working with parliamentarians for nuclear non-proliferation and disarmament, a global network of over 800 parliamentarians working to achieve nuclear disarmament. And he is leading the international campaign to move the nuclear weapons money at nuclearweaponsmoney.org. Welcome to the 11 Days of Global Unity Telesummit, Alan Ware.
Thank you, Rick, and I'm excited about this. I think it's a fantastic initiative you've put together of these 11 days focusing on different themes and bringing people together.
Yes, exactly. So it's great to have you with us today, and I think people would be interested to know how you came to be so dedicated and committed to abolishing nuclear weapons, and then please tell us about your work with the parliamentarians, the Move the Nuclear Weapons Money campaign, and what's coming up with counting the nuclear weapons money.
Yeah, thank you, Rick. I started my life as a kindergarten teacher in New Zealand, and this was a time when France was still testing nuclear weapons in the Pacific region, and in New Zealand, we were part of a nuclear alliance. We had nuclear warships coming into our harbours. And for me, you know, trying to prepare children for the future, if there wasn't going to be a future from the nuclear war, then what's the point of doing this? And in fact, even the production, the testing of the nuclear weapons has a horrific effect on women and children, reproductive systems, for countless generations. So for me, I felt I had to be involved. If I'm going to be concerned about children and our the future generations, I have to be involved in the abolition of nuclear weapons. So what I started in actually was peace education. I worked a lot in getting peace and disarmament education established into New Zealand schools, and also campaigning. We banned nuclear weapons from New Zealand, but we realised, of course, it's not enough just to ban them from your own country. If they're going to be used anywhere in the world, it'll affect the whole world. So then I moved overseas. I moved to New York to set up a case in the International Court of Justice on the illegality of nuclear weapons, and we basically won the case. And after that, worked on trying to get various United Nations initiatives, working with the UN Secretary General and with governments at the UN, and then realizing that the governments were actually accepting that they had obligations to eliminate nuclear weapons, but they weren't acting on them. So we needed to get parliamentarians to push the governments to implement their obligations for nuclear disarmament. So that's why I've been very involved in establishing and overseeing this network of parliamentarians from around the world. And then the Move the Nuclear Weapons Money is quite a recent initiative, although we've been working on these issues in a number of ways around the world for some time. Move the Nuclear Weapons Money was bringing together a number of different constituencies, the parliamentarians, the civil society, the lawyers and others, to look at both cutting the budgets, the huge budgets that are going into nuclear weapons in the 9 nuclear armed states, and also ending investments in nuclear weapons, because there are about 26 corporations that banks and pension funds and governments and universities and individual investors are investing in, and ending those investments and looking at how to invest instead in the future, how to invest in renewable energy and in a sustainable world. So the Move the Nuclear Weapons Money campaign is working in cooperation with similar campaigns to stop investments in fossil fuels, for example, to stop investments in the entire weapons industry. So we're all, in a sense, working together on different parts of it and building cooperation. And also in those who are working in, as I said, sustainable investment. And to highlight this, we're going to be doing a Count the Nuclear Weapons Money action in October. That'll be during Disarmament Week. What we'll do is we'll count out the nuclear weapons budget for the next 10 years. That's $1 trillion, huge amount of money. We want to count it out to show how much money that is, take it from the nuclear weapons symbolically and put it into the Sustainable Development Goals. Now, if we were counting with $1 notes, it would take us 1,900 years. We don't have that time. If we're doing it with $100 notes, it would take us 190 years. We don't have that amount of time. So we've created a $1 million note. This is it. This is what it's being spent on at the moment, nuclear weapons. This is what it should be spent on instead, the environment, our future. We'll have 1 million of these, huge amount of money. We've been counting them out. 1 million, 2 million, 3 million. It'll still take us 7 days and 7 nights non-stop counting to count out the nuclear weapons budget. That's how much it is. And we'll be reallocating it to other things to show that that money could help protect the climate, could help eliminate poverty, could help achieve the Sustainable Development Goals. And we'll be inviting public to count with us. So it's a very, people can get engaged, and then they can decide after they count 100 million or 200 million what they would like that money to go to, which of the different goals and the Sustainable Development Goals they would put that money into.
Yeah, oh, that sounds fabulous. And are you going to be doing this in one location, or are you going to be moving into different locations to count the money?
So we're doing it primarily in New York, but we're going to be moving it around different places in New York. So we'll do it on the back of a truck. We've got a truck with a plexiglass big box on the back that we can stand up and put a table there. We can count out the money, and then we can park it in front of the United Nations for a few hours, or we can take it down to Wall Street and park it in front of Wall Street. We go and park it in front of the offices of one of the nuclear weapons corporations, and as we're counting, a delegation can go on with a letter to explain to the Nuclear Weapons Corporation that we're telling people not to invest in them as long as they make nuclear weapons. We can go in front of one of the banks that's decided not to invest in nuclear weapons and say, yay, on this bank, they've decided not to. We can go to another bank that still invests and say, bad bank. We can go to many places. We can go to a school if there's a school that wants to join in and highlight that the money should be going to education, or outside a hospital. So we'll be moving around a little bit like guerrilla theatre, but we'll have a base location so that at the end of the day, all the money that's been counted will come back to like a pop-up shop, and then will be reallocated to the Sustainable Development Goals as like an art installation that will stay there for the 7 days and maybe another 7 days afterwards.
Very nice. And I hope you can live stream that too, so people can be following that and commenting on it all around the world. It could become like a global event in a sense.
Yes, we will be live streaming it. And also, there will be some people who are doing what we call satellite countings. Like there are some who are doing it for a few hours in Wellington, New Zealand, some in London, for example, and a few others in different places. So at certain times, we'll put a bit of a stop on the counting in New York and say, okay, we're going to switch over now to the counting in Wellington, New Zealand. How are you going down there? And so on. So yeah, we're hoping to make it a global activity.
That sounds fabulous. And you mentioned before that you helped to get a ban on nuclear weapons in New Zealand. I think a lot of people listening to this will be amazed that a whole country has decided to do that. And just how many other countries have decided to formally, make that part of their law?
So the majority of countries in the world do not have nuclear weapons and never had nuclear weapons. And most of them, not all of them, but most of them have formed nuclear weapon-free zones. So there's about 115 countries in nuclear weapon-free zones. There are other countries that don't have nuclear weapons that aren't yet in a nuclear weapon-free zone. So that's like a regional treaty prohibiting nuclear weapons. What was interesting about New Zealand is that we were a country that used to subscribed to nuclear deterrence. We were under a extended nuclear deterrence relationship with the United States, i.e. they were protecting us with nuclear weapons. If we got in a war with someone, they could use nuclear weapons on our behalf. You know, many of us thought that was stupid, makes us a nuclear target. It's not protection at all. But we had to convince other New Zealanders because, you know, there was still some fear in New Zealand. We'd just about been taken over by Japan in the Second World War. We were scared, you know, and years later by the Soviets. You know, there's fears about big countries. But what we've found is after banning nuclear weapons and telling the US we don't need nuclear protection, we'll be much better off. We've had much better relations with countries. We've managed to sort out our conflicts with other countries through better means, through mediation, negotiation, the United Nations. There are better ways of resolving conflicts and threatening to annihilate others with nuclear weapons. So now everyone supports it. It used to be just like the Liberals and the left wing supported nuclear abolition, but now in New Zealand everybody does, the Conservatives, the Liberals, everybody. So it shows that it's possible to shift from relying on nuclear weapons to relying on better ways of solving it.
Exactly. That's great. What a wonderful success story. So, you know, recently we've seen problems with the Intermediate Range Nuclear Forces Treaty, the INF, and the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty, the NPT. And some people think that rather than trying to work on them, more effort should be made on the treaty to ban nuclear weapons in general. Could you please say what you think is most important for people to understand about the status of the INF and the NPT treaties, and how do you see them in relationship to the movement to abolish nuclear weapons?
Yes, so the Intermediate Range Nuclear Forces Treaty was a treaty between, used to be the Soviet Union, then Russia, and the United States to ban a particular class of nuclear weapons, these intermediate range nuclear weapons that are very risky, that break the line to some degree between conventional war and nuclear war, because they are weapons that could be used like in the battlefield. That's the idea of them, intermediate range ones. So it was really important to have that ban on those nuclear weapons. They were mostly nuclear weapons deployed in Europe, so they got taken away from Europe. Now that that treaty has fallen apart, the United States withdrew from it, and now Russia has also withdrawn from it. It opens the door to new destabilizing nuclear weapons being built by the United States and Russia. What we are calling for, we wanted, of course, our network of PND parliamentarians plus, you know, other in the civil society were very upset that the treaty was falling apart. One way that we're working to try and ensure that these new weapons are not built is to work with the Congress, particularly the United States, but also the parliaments in Europe. What we can do, for example, in the United States is the Congress, and we have a number of congressional resolutions saying this, is that Congress will not authorize funding for any of those weapons that would have been banned under the INF Treaty, even though the INF Treaty is no longer in existence. This shows that we can't always rely on governments. At the moment, the governments, particularly the US and Russia, are not doing a good job of managing the nuclear issue. They're like going into arms races, they're threatening each other. So we have to work with other parts of the countries, and the Congress in the US, parliamentarians in Russia who we're engaging with through the OSCE Parliamentary Assembly are one way to work. So that's the INF Treaty. The Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty is a much broader treaty. It's most countries in the world are members of it. Most countries are members as non-nuclear states. So they have agreed that they will not acquire nuclear weapons, and the nuclear armed states that have joined it have agreed that they will eliminate nuclear weapons at some stage. It would be hugely risky if that treaty, even more risky if that treaty fell apart. If that treaty fell apart, we would get more countries acquiring nuclear weapons. It could be Saudi Arabia, could be Egypt, Iran. These are just waiting in the wings. If they the others would do that. And it would also take away a legal constraint on the nuclear weapon states, the legal obligation for them to work for disarmament. So it is not a good idea to call or to suggest, the unraveling of that treaty. And one new initiative to try and ensure that that treaty holds and becomes more effective is something called the Stepping Stones Initiative. That 16 countries have joined together, some non-nuclear states and some allied states, to focus on concrete measures that they can push at the Non-Proliferation Treaty Review Conference next year to ensure that we reduce the risk of nuclear weapons and make steps towards nuclear disarmament. Then the third one you mentioned, the treaty to prohibit nuclear weapons, is a treaty which is a comprehensive prohibition. And this is a really good thing. The problem with this is that only non-nuclear states have signed it. None of the nuclear armed states and none of the allied states under extended nuclear deterrence have said that they would sign it or support it. So it doesn't really impact on them because it's only binding on those states that sign it. It's a little bit like the vegetarians of the world, and I'm a vegetarian, so I'd support this measure, join together and, draft a treaty banning meat eating. And there's reasons for this. The agricultural industry is one of the biggest contributors to climate change. So if we all became vegetarian, even better if we all became vegan, that would help the climate. It's also, violence, killing the animals. So I think it would be a good thing to have, a global treaty banning meat eating. But it's very unlikely that meat eaters would sort of sign on to it. It's more likely that we're going to encourage meat eaters to reduce the amount of meat they're eating, to become more comfortable and feel secure that they can be nourished and feed their family and survive, having vegetarian meals, 4 or 5 times a week. And then gradually they'll realize, they don't need meat at all. But it's very unlikely we'd get them all to do it suddenly cold turkey. So that's, I think, the treaty on the prohibition of nuclear weapons is unlikely to impact on the nuclear armed states because it doesn't really have a way of engaging them, helping them resolve the issues they would have, like ensuring that everybody else is giving up nuclear weapons. That's the idea of a nuclear weapons convention, is everybody gives them up. The treaty on the prohibition of nuclear weapons, if somebody signs on, they have to sign on regardless of whether somebody else has nuclear weapons or not. So it's very unlikely the nuclear armed states would sign on, as I said, to the treaty on the prohibition of nuclear weapons. So the 3 different treaties, they all have a role to play. But in terms of, elimination of nuclear weapons, we need more than just treaties. And we need, basically a consciousness change that we can't have our security relying on threatening others, whether that's threatening with nuclear weapons or other biological weapons or even war. So I think that we need to strengthen the UN Charter prohibition on war, Article 2.4 of the UN Charter. It's sort of forgotten about many times, but the UN Charter basically does prohibit war and provides all the mechanisms for resolving conflicts without going to war. I think we need to strengthen that, and if we strengthen that, it'll be much easier then to get the nuclear armed states to feel more confident and give up the nuclear weapons.
That makes perfect sense.
The last thing, though, of course, is we also have to change the vested interests in the nuclear arms race, because those who are making the nuclear weapons are making a killing, pun intended. They are making billions of dollars, so they have a vested interest in keeping it going. So we have to shift the financial interests. That's why Move the Nuclear Weapons Money is so important.
Exactly. And, you're talking about the shift in consciousness, and, that's something that We the World is involved with. And so I wanted to talk about the role of movements here, because it seems like working at the level of parliamentarians is essential, and we have to also mobilize people on the ground to begin to make a shift in what's in how people are thinking just in general. So I wanted to mention We the World is working to expand the movement to make a cultural shift towards we consciousness, which sounds kind of like what you were talking about. A we consciousness is about prioritizing the common good and the well-being of all as a way to address the underlying reasons why we have nuclear weapons, and we have poverty, and we have the climate crisis, and why that the people have allowed those things to continue. So do you think that we need to create such a cultural shift in order to abolish nuclear weapons forever?
Totally. And I mean, there is already the seeds of this. I mean, this is not new, the idea of the common good. It's been around for a long time. But it's putting that into practice, which is so important. The common good is also the same principle for conflict resolution. You know, the idea of conflict resolution is not compromise. It's not, oh, I have to give up something so the other person gives up something. That's not really the idea of conflict resolution. Really, the key principle for conflict resolution is transformation to the idea that you're talking about common interests. So I'm not thinking just about how am I going to get agreement from the person. I actually have to think about what is in the interests of that person, and how can my interests also, you know, measure up to their interests, so we have common interests. That way we then come out as partners, not just as adversaries. And that's, I think, part of what we is about. It's about looking at how do we transform the various mechanisms in society to elevate that common interest. Now, I say elevate because it's already there. A lot of humanity is already working on the common good. There is so much of what we do that is cooperative and means everybody benefits. I mean, the rules of air travel, for example. If we didn't have the rules of air travel, the planes would be crashing into each other the whole time. So actually everybody following the rules of air travel so that the planes don't crash into each other, it's everybody's common good. There are so many other examples of how we manage society and humanity that we're already doing so much. But there are some parts of it that we haven't yet got to. And the idea of security is one. There is still such a strong mindset, you know, that security is based on defending ourselves against the other rather than finding what the common interest with the other is. So that's where the transformation has to play. It's already in the UN Charter, it just hasn't been implemented in the politics. But that's where the cooperation between the movements and the parliamentarians is so important. Because if you have the movements without a political process, they don't go anywhere. You can have 1 million people marching in Central Park in New York, which we did in 1982, but the leaders, if there's no connection with the leaders, then they'll continue with their old mindset on security. Similarly, if you only work with the parliamentarians or the leaders, it's very difficult because they don't get the push. They don't get the capacity to be able to move this forward. A parliamentarian will be beaten back, you know, whether it's by the arms manufacturers or the opposition. But when they say, hey, I've got 1,000 people from my constituency said I need to take this forward, it strengthens them. So the cooperation between civil society and parliamentarians and mayors is vital.
Exactly. That's a perfect way of talking about we and the importance of expanding we, so that it includes all those who are in power as well as people on the ground, as you were saying. So as we wind up, also on the panel today, we're speaking with Jonathan Granoff. How have you worked with Jonathan in the past?
Well, it's wonderful that you're bringing Jonathan here, because he embraces many aspects of humanity and brings them into this issue. So he's a lawyer, and he sees the value of law, and not just in terms of setting the rules for operating, but also for helping to forge solutions and agreements. So he brings law into this disarmament work. He has been working with legislators. His organisation, Global Security Institute, was established by Senator Alan Cranston, a visionary senator. So Jonathan's organisation helped us, PND, to engage with senators and legislators, particularly in the United States. Jonathan is also a representative of the World Summit of Nobel Peace Laureates to the United Nations. So he takes the vision of these Nobel laureates into the UN and also creates connections between the movements that the Nobel laureates are involved in and UN processes. And finally, he's also a UN representative for the Parliament of the World's Religions, and himself, he studied, religious studies as a young student. He's been very engaged in interfaith movement, and the majority of the world's population follow some particular faith. And these faiths can be helpful, or faith doctrine can be harmful, depending on the way that it's used. The interfaith movement, which Jonathan is one of the leaders of, is helping the faiths to use their common principles, their common aspirations in a positive way for humanity and for a sustainable world. So all these areas make it a wonderful relationship that we have our network of parliamentarians with Jonathan and his institute.
Exactly. So that's fabulous. Well, this has really been a wonderful discussion. Thank you for your dedication and commitment, Alan Ware.
Thank you very much, Rick. It's been a pleasure being with you today.
Okay. Thank you. So Jonathan, well, actually, Karen, would you like to formally introduce Jonathan Granoff?
I would be so honored. Oh, wow. Thank you so much for sharing that with us. Alan was incredible. What an inspiring and beautiful, beautiful person to know that he's working on all of these issues. We also have the amazing Jonathan Granoff here, who is the president of the Global Security Institute. He's an attorney, author, international advocate, emphasizing the legal and ethical dimensions of human development and security, with a specific focus on the threats posed by nuclear weapons. He is also the 2014 nominee for the Nobel Peace Prize, and Jonathan was an honorary co-chair at the launch of 11 Days of Global Unity alongside of Jane Goodall, Marianne Williamson, Deepak Chopra, and many others exactly 15 years ago today. How wonderful. Welcome, Jonathan. Thank you so much for being here to celebrate with us, and thank you for all the work that you're doing in the world.
Thank you for doing the work that you're doing and amplifying the voices of people who actually care about loving one another and loving the gift of creation and loving the entirety of the human family. I mean, imagine if you said you were somebody who was pursuing a spiritual path, but you only loved some people. I'm often reminded of, there's a group of people in Indonesia called the Azmat. They call themselves sort of the real human beings. And everyone else on the planet is called Awame, the edible ones. That's the extreme other side of we the world.
That's a real us versus them, isn't it?
Us versus them, but you know what? It's not as much of an us versus them as the threat posed by 9 nations possessing and threatening to use nuclear weapons, in which, if they used them, they would not only destroy all the others, but they would destroy themselves. Because we now know, and we didn't know this when the nuclear venture began, we now know that if less than 1% of the approximately 14,500 nuclear weapons in the world today were to be used, it would throw at least 5 million tons of soot into the stratosphere and end productive agriculture that's so necessary to feed civilization. And it would virtually end human civilization within a decade. So we've moved from mutually assured destruction to self-assured destruction. And the idea that in order to protect a creation that we have made, the state, that we would risk the destruction of all other human beings and all future human beings, and all of the wonders of creation and the other species that share the planet, that we share the planet with, is for me nothing less than an arrogance of immense proportions. And to quote George Kennan, the great economist who was the architect of the theories of the Cold War, certainly no leftist or radical, an affront to God, a blasphemy. And it truly is. And yet, most of the public lives unaware of this threat, or intentionally unaware, because it really is so overwhelmingly horrible that we just don't want to deal with it. Well, the fact is, facts matter. We have to deal with it. The bright side of it is, it puts us all together as one family. And we have to work together to address it. We have to find the common good. There's no way that any state can have a monopoly of nuclear weapons. As long as some states have them, others will want them, and eventually they will get them. Having them by accident, design, or madness, they will be used. And any use is catastrophic. Because of this very logical equation, there's an imperative of logic to get rid of them. But I'd like to talk in our time together of the imperative of the spiritual imperative, the ethical imperative, the legal imperative, the security imperative, the military imperative, that actually the idea that we can continue to modernize and threaten to use these weapons and obtain security is mythical. It's based on myths. It's not based on realism. The realism goes somewhere else, and that's what I'd like to talk about. What does realism tell us, and what does myth tell us?
Go for it. What do they say?
Well, the United Nations Commission on the Environment said that there is no greater threat to the environment than nuclear weapons. Full stop. Full stop. Climate change is slow burn. Nuclear weapons are fast burn. Nuclear weapons would simply destroy the ecosystem of the planet, such that it couldn't sustain human life if we had a full-out nuclear war with a nuclear winter. But I believe that the environmental consequences reside more in not just the economic cost of the trillions. I thought Alan Ware's presentation was absolutely mark on, except for one point. He dramatically understated the amount of money spent on this venture. $1 trillion is only a portion of what the United States has pledged to spend, which is closer to 1.7 trillion, according to Senator Markey. But that would stimulate other countries as well. So we're talking trillions, and trillions of dollars we could solve the addiction to fossil fuel. We could solve the inadequate education of children across the world. We could solve numerous environmental and health problems. But the biggest cost, in my opinion, is the opportunity cost. And by that I mean the opportunity of the diplomats of the world to exercise their craft of finding common ground amongst nations and moving forward. Alan used the example of the diplomats achieving a legal instruments ensuring that we can fly airplanes everywhere in the world. Well, the diplomats figured out ways in which trade can take place everywhere in the world, in which we have a system in which you can get arbitration and adjudicate financial disputes anywhere in the world. So 50, 60 years ago, it wasn't that easy to franchise everywhere in the world, or transfer money, or rely on the legal systems to enforce contracts everywhere in the world. Not so today. That's because the business community realized that through the rule of law, they could find ways of globalizing the economy, which they've done. But in the area of how security is defined, we're still living like city-states, garrisons, building walls, living in fear, instead of recognizing the reality, which has been shown to us through the eyeballs of our astronauts. The planet Earth is very fragile. It's just a small fiber that allows us to breathe in infinite space that doesn't have any borders. So the environmental the environmental reality we now face with the climate, the threats to the health of the oceans, rainforests, are global in nature and require global cooperation. Is it likely, a rhetorical question with an obvious answer, is it likely that nations squaring off with massive arsenals that could incinerate billions of people in an afternoon, threatening one another, are likely to make the necessary compromises and sit down and cooperate to protect the climate, the rainforests, the oceans, while the next day the same people are threatening each other with annihilation as a way of getting their way? It's preposterous. Imagine trying to negotiate something in your family while everybody puts handguns on the kitchen table.
That's right.
It's preposterous. It's ethically preposterous for a handful of nations to say these weapons are good for us and not good for you. I was speaking with Jane Goodall. We were speaking before about 1,000 high school kids in Philadelphia, and Jane gave an explanation of how she got involved in these global issues, and particularly nuclear weapons, having seen the destruction of the rainforest in which these chimpanzees that she was so in love with were losing their home, and that the forest was being destroyed because people needed firewood just to cook. And then why were they so poor? And they were so poor because of the economic system and the colonialist exploitation. And she started looking at the global system and realized that to protect this group of chimpanzees, it was a global phenomenon. Fabulous presentation. That indeed we, one human family. The spiritual admonition of the wise since time immemorial to see all human beings as precious in the eyes of God. But now it's a practical necessity, Now, going back to ethics. So the ethical admonition that all civilized people of all religions and persuasions and philosophies accept is the golden rule. Do unto others as you would have them do unto you, or refrain from doing unto others what you would not want done to you. Some iteration of the idea of the equity and value of all as equal. Nuclear weapons violate that principle. And the consequence when nations or people or individuals violate that principle in your personal life, in your family, in your own intentions, is chaos. If your own inner heart does not want for others what you want for yourself, you will not find peace of mind. If your inner heart does want for others what you want for yourself, and you truly love other people, and each of us knows the secret of what's in our hearts, but I can tell you, if you love other people and you use things rather than love things and use people, you will find peace. It's a guaranteed formula. It's not new, didn't come from me, came from the great mystery that gives us life. And that's why every single religion and every wise person has iterated it in some way. And when nations violate this principle, because human beings are bound by this law and this principle, chaos ensues. So imagine if the Biological Weapons Convention said, no country can use polio or smallpox as a weapon, but we will depend on 9 countries to threaten annihilation with the use of the plague as a weapon. And no other country can use the plague, but we'll let them use the plague for our security. Everybody would say that's preposterous. And that's precisely the regime that we have with nuclear weapons. 9 countries saying, trust us. 9 countries saying we have a right to declare that these weapons are good for us, but not good in your hands. That is ethically incoherent and unsustainable, legally.
Absolutely. Can you give us just a little bit of a sense of the work that you're doing as the president of the Global Security Institute?
I don't do anything by myself in this regard. So, and so it's mainly advocating that nations do things and that nations live up to their legal obligations to negotiate the elimination of nuclear weapons. So we have conferences, and I write learned papers in journals and articles and give speeches, and citizens don't make nuclear weapons. We can't vote on it. But I do believe that every one of us, certainly in democracies, should be asking every political candidate 3 questions that are integrated. What are you doing to protect the climate? What are you doing to get rid of poverty? What are you doing to get rid of nuclear weapons? And they say, well, why are you asking these 3? Because they're interconnected.
Yeah, they're totally interconnected.
And so I'm a person that believes that ideas matter. You know, it was the idea of the nation state that ended the 30 Years' War in Europe, in which Protestants and Catholics were going to continue slaughtering each other in massive numbers as to whose definition of Jesus' love was better.
Yeah.
So the idea that we need to create a different form of governance was very important. And right now, people are looking for short-term, simple, magical solutions.
Yeah.
To learn management by objective. And that is foolish. If Jesus approached the world with that metric, he certainly wouldn't have continued. If Socrates had done that, he wouldn't have continued. If Thomas Jefferson hadn't put forward the premise that all men are created equal, we wouldn't be where we are today, where we say that all men and women are created equal, and all people of all colors, genders, races, nationalities, and religions are equal. We wouldn't have that. So you have to look at what the ought is. So I try my best to bring these principles into the debates where decision makers matter, or decisions have consequences, as well as wherever I get a forum like this. And I seek out as best as I can others of like mind working for the common good and peace, and amplify their platform as well. So the Global Security Institute has the Nonpartisan Security Group, composed of mainly diplomats who negotiated the treaties that bring us the security that we do have. So we have we have that kind of relationship. We have the Middle Powers Initiative, which is not that active right now because the nuclear weapon states are so dysfunctional. But for years, we were able to be a bridge between the maximum demands of the massive numbers of countries demanding nuclear disarmament now, and the slow pace of the nuclear weapon states. So we had, say, 3 major conferences with President Carter at the Carter Center, and maybe 30 conferences to advance these ideas. But look, nuclear weapons and getting rid of them is morally a moral imperative. But the way states operate and the way militaries operate is not all that simple. The START Treaty has complex protocols, hundreds of pages of them. You can't reduce, it's sort of like people expect that this issue could be very simple. We even have a president in the United States tries to simplify it. But it would be like a person without expertise going into a hospital and saying, yeah, I could do brain surgery. I mean, what is it? You cut the person open, you pull the crap out, and then you sew them back together. Well, no, it isn't that simple. So we need professional advocates, lawyers, diplomats, but the moral imperative, the soul of the issue, the passion of the issue has to come from the people. And how people step out and express themselves on this, that's an issue of conscience. And so I try to stimulate the conscience of people to step forward and find ways at every level of society. If you're a teacher, make sure that this is taught in the schools. Make sure that conflict resolution is taught. Make sure that the reality of nuclear weapons.
Jonathan, are there programs that are available to teach this to the children?
Yes, there's lots of them.
Because that's what I do. I teach kindness programs in the schools. So I would love to bring this, and I also design musical coloring books, and I'd like to collaborate with you. I do musical coloring books that are educational, that talk about the sustainable goals. So I would love to work with you on that to get this to the children, because you know what I see it as also, it's really another form, teaching about this is another form of helping to create bully prevention, which is October is International Bully Prevention Month. And so, this would be a great
This is the ultimate bully prevention.
Yes, this is the ultimate bully prevention. Maybe we could work on this together, because I work with all the kindness. I'm one of the national kindness leaders here in the United States, and I would put you in touch and we can collaborate on all of this.
Well, that's wonderful.
That's the question. What can we do together that we can't do on our own?
Well, I think
that's our question we ask all the time. And here at We the World, that's, the 3 I's, and that make a we, so that we go from a me society to a we society with those 3 I's. And Rick, what are those 3 I's?
The 3 I's are inspire, inform, and involve. And I think Jonathan is interested in kind of getting into this kind of concept of the cultural shift from I to we.
Absolutely. One of the roles that I have is I'm the senior advisor to the summit of the Nobel Peace Prize winners, and we're having a summit September 19th through 21st in Mexico, and there certainly will be an inclusion of these comprehensive, holistic approaches to security that has to include children, it has to include youth now, and it has to include the moral dimension. And so, yes, an answer to your question, yes, I can provide you with lots of material. But let me tell you this, for example, here's a low-hanging fruit. We need to get the Universal Declaration of Human Rights in the hands of every secondary school child.
Yes.
So I'm pushing for a General Assembly resolution calling on ministers of education to ensure that they get that. 15 years ago, Anna Cataldi, the great, courageous woman who stayed in Sarajevo to photograph the siege, raised several $1 million to get little passports of it. But that's not sustainable because it was physical. Now, the vast majority of kids on the planet have access to electronic communications, and they could study that. The Human Rights Commission of the UN has just declared that nuclear weapons and the threat to use them is a violation of people's human rights.
Yes.
People need to know that. It's a human rights issue. It's an environmental issue. It's also an issue dealing with what you talk about, which is the fundamental thing that makes us human, which is loving kindness and compassion, which you could say is kindness. So I'm one of the founders of the Peace Pledge for living, for living loving kindness and compassion.
Yes,
And
I'm one of the founders for helping with the Children's Peace Pledge Project.
And so we've just decided to partner with them.
The school that I taught at last year was the first school that signed all the Peace Pledge, and they created a beautiful Peace Pledge bulletin board. I have pictures.
Yeah.
We did a whole, I write a whole musical called Kindness Changes Everything. And it goes into all of this information in a song form so that the children really start to see how empowered they are as kindness leaders.
That's wonderful. With the Peace Pledge, it's wonderful. There was this one woman who picked it up in Pakistan and has 200,000 kids every morning singing a pledge to live loving kindness and compassion.
Yes, that's my partner. That was the partner that I was working with Julie and the song. And I shared the song here. And we're going to have peace buddies this year. We're going to have where they can zoom into each other's classrooms. And that's going to be with Nakira.
That's the woman who did that.
That's going to be with Nakira. That's we're going to be reaching out to you to talk to you about this project that we're trying to do. We're actually
this is the first meeting on that subject.
Yeah. So,
I mean, yes. So obviously I'm a yes.
Because it's just so beautiful because we all need each other, and we all have gifts that I have gifts that you don't have, and you have gifts that I don't have, and that's what Desmond Tutu says. So why don't we, just put our gifts together and really expand this.
Yes, of
like
course.
Your beautiful quote, right? That beautiful quote.
I know. Yeah, we're working up the momentum for that
Yeah, you have a beautiful quote. Yeah, but
I think Jonathan has a couple more things to say, and then we'll.
Absolutely. But that is so beautiful. And when we do go into this, this topic of helping to see how can we go into this we consciousness, how can we really spread this we consciousness to the masses?
That's a different question than we've been dealing with, and very important and worthy of a separate show, which is, how do we spread a greater consciousness of caring for one another? As you know, there's the Compassion Project with hundreds of cities. We're formally partnering with them, and then, but I want to say that with nuclear weapons, if you view it as a social disease, because it is, and it's based on two ideas that arise out of extreme fear. Very much like, say, let's analogize to the human body. A very, very strong flight-fight response. If a person lives within that condition all the time, they will have high blood pressure and inflammation. Right? So because it's out of proportion. Similarly, and doctors now, if they look at a situation, they look at us holistically. 50 years ago, you went to a doctor with a stomach ache, he would just give you a pill to get rid of the stomach ache. Today, he'll say, what do you eat? How do you live? How's your sleep? What are your personal relations? What's your job? Do you have any other symptoms in your life? Because the human body we know is whole. Similarly, we need to approach security holistically. And that's what the SDG, the Sustainable Development Goals, that deal with poverty, gender equity, education, conflict prevention and resolution, or, poverty. All of these issues are interconnected in the way the human body is interconnected. And one of the aspects that's been missing is the moral and ethical dimension, is the capacity of human beings to use loving kindness and compassion to solve human problems. Now, the irony in all this is that you never find a war in which the state has not used love of your family, love of your fellow soldiers, love of your religion, love of your race to get people to kill.
Yeah.
And we are saying, wait a minute, let's use loving kindness and compassion for loving kindness and compassion.
Yes.
Do you see? So
Yes.
we're the realists here.
Yes.
It is not realism to rely on two doctrines. One is the pursuit of military superiority as a means of security, global security. It did not work in Vietnam. It did not work in Afghanistan. It is not working in Kashmir. It will not work in Palestine and Israel. It doesn't work.
Yeah.
What does work is when we work together.
Definitely.
The other issue is called strategic stability. Now, strategic stability similarly is immeasurable, but it is subverted by the contrary doctrine of military superiority. So the states with nuclear weapons say, trust us, we have strategic stability, while they're pursuing military superiority. They expect us to accept a schizophrenic presentation. We say, you can measure the health of the oceans with science.
Yeah.
You can measure the health of the topsoil. You can measure the water table. You can measure the rainforest health. You can measure the elimination of pandemic diseases. You can measure the elimination of poverty. You cannot measure strategic stability or military advantage. These are mythical. And it is, and so we are dealing with myths or dreams that lead to nightmares.
Yeah.
And we are saying, I think we need to say, we are not dealing with imagine or I have a dream. No, not anymore. We are saying we are the realists. It is realistic to protect the oceans and the rainforest. It is realistic to work together to eliminate poverty. And we are the realists. And we need to teach children that this is the realism.
Yeah.
This is not imagination.
Yeah.
This is not a vision. This is what is real. It is real that the planet Earth is one. It is real. It is real that it is a miracle in infinite space. And we may be the only place where there's life. We may not be, but we are certain that there is love on this planet. And we are certain that there are things that are an affront to that. And one of them is the threat to use nuclear weapons. So I am passionate about including that in education and asking every person watching this to demand of their political leaders.
Yes.
What are your plans to get rid of nuclear weapons and live up to the legal obligations under the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty to negotiate their elimination, to the moral imperative to do it, to the practical and logical imperative to do it, the ethical imperative to do it, and common sense.
Yeah.
Ronald Reagan had it right. A nuclear war can never, ever be won and therefore must never be fought.
Never.
That's very basic. But let's go back to the whys, not just to the practical, the whys. The whys have always taught us to love one another and to move from love of self to selfless love. And thus to obtain not only a life of meaning, but the very liberation of our souls, the celebration of our life, which doesn't take place if it's all about I. It only takes place when the I becomes we. When the I becomes we.
Yeah.
Very nice. And people can connect with you by going to gsinstitute.org?
Yes, that's a good place.
That's great. And Jonathan, would you like to do us the honor of telling people what you said at the launch of We.net and the We campaign at the very end of your, when you talked about expanding We?
Okay, as best as I can remember.
Because we say it every time.
We close.
I don't know if I'll say it the same way, but the point is, it's my prayer that the message that came to your heart and your heart, Rick, your heart, Karen, to which you said yes, will come to so many hearts, such that these hearts will resonate and say, we are one. It's just us. there's no them.
Right. So succinctly, what you said was, I hope we expand so much that there is no longer any them.
That's much better. Well, we need somebody who can speak more
beautiful
succinctly than
both
me.
ways. See, it was beautiful. It just got more expansive, though. You just brought it into the next generation for the, you just brought more into it. So that's
right. That's right. So
more
thank you.
expansive.
Yeah, we you know what? They have Doctors Without Borders.
Yeah.
We are the people with Hearts Without Borders.
Yes.
Perfect.
We are. Oh, that's another beautiful quote now. Thank you, Jonathan.
Oh, maybe I'll get time to write a book.
Yeah, maybe, or just or even just do a journal with quotes, and then have a place where people can reflect on your.
You know what I would just say? I would say, remember your humanity. Remember yourself. Remember you are a miracle. Forget the rest.
Jonathan is one of the most creative people I've ever met. He unfolds poetry at the least provocation. I'll get emails from him. Check this out, and then a wonderful, incredible thing. I mean, we should collect all your emails and put that into a book.
If I, yeah, well, I hope you do, because I'm one skill that God has not gifted me with is organization. It just comes to. I mean, it just sort of like, it just comes so fast, and But this is here's one that I've learned. It's enough to see the sunrise correctly, but you can't see the sunrise correctly unless you have found the beauty within yourself, commensurate with the beauty of the sunrise. So, like, have a good fight with somebody over nothing, and then go watch the sunrise. It will not look beautiful. And then, but the next day, say your prayers, come to a state of harmony within yourself, where the intrinsic beauty of your soul and its luminosity shine, and then go look at the sunrise.
Yeah.
And then you'll know why we need to work together.
Yeah.
And so the first place we have to work is within ourselves. But then we need the tools of law and morality to govern the behavior of people who don't govern themselves by good conscience and goodwill. Right. We cannot neglect the tools of law and morality. And that's why we need a prohibition on certain conduct. Absolutely. But it has to come from you and I finding that place in our hearts where that true caring for one another is gifted to us. Yeah. Every child comes with this open heart.
Absolutely.
And we still have it deep within ourselves to uncover. I hope that all of us uncover it, and then we can be the peace that we want to see, and we will be much more effective peace advocates.
Absolutely. Very nice. Thank you so much, Jonathan Granoff. And thank you,
Rick,
Karen.
can you tell people how the best way is to get involved with the We Team, and the way that we can talk a little bit more about how they can get involved to be part of the solution?
Okay, yeah, thank you. If you go to we.net, you can join the We Team there. Just sign right up as a volunteer coordinator. You can also sign up your organization right on the homepage there of we.net, and your organization will be listed in the partner directory, and we can collaborate going forward. We also have the Global Unity Calendar, which is a free public international calendar. So it's a resource for organizations around the world to share their events and announcements coming up. And when you post on our calendar, it goes out and appears on multiple websites, because our calendar is synchronized with other organizations' calendars as well. What did I leave up? You can
also like our page on Facebook, and you'll never miss an episode of this amazing summit, first of all. But we also have the Welcome to We show, and we have incredible guests that we are interviewing all the time, talking about answering that question, what can we do together that we can't do on our own? And honestly, another great thing you can do is follow us on Twitter. We're the We Campaign on Twitter. And so when you follow us, we follow you back. And then we start to really amplify each other's work. And that's what it's all about. We use social media in a sacred way so that we can really expand the technology that has been a gift to us in a way that helps us to really see the world as we are one global family.
Couldn't have said it any better myself. Thank you. And thank you, Jonathan. Looking forward to going forward together.
Bye, everybody. Thanks so much. And remember, don't forget to share this out on all your platforms. You can share this in your emails. You can share this in your newsletters. You can get the link and you can share this with your friends. You can private message it to your friends on Facebook. There's so many ways that you can be part of the solution using your sacred social media in a way that really expands the goodness in our world and the kindness in our world. Remember, do something kind every day.
Thank you.